more kind of fun things that we can do in Illustrator that we haven't talked about yet. Yeah, I'll just review a couple things as well. So last time I kind of just like threw a bunch of random shapes onto this composition, and they're all sort of like in this like layer here. So one thing that we want to do with like Photoshop as well as Illustrator is keep our stuff nice and organized. And so one thing I might do, I kind of like how this like weird bunch of shapes kind of turned out. So I think I might actually leave these here and just add a little bit to this. But I have this like type part that I created where I wrote MMP 100. And I want to kind of separate that from my background shape because otherwise I might edit it by mistake or move it around, and I might want to keep that separate. So by default, when we're looking at the layer, we really just see like kind of a little thumbnail of what's in there, and then we can turn it on or off and we can lock it. But if we open up the layer, you can actually see all of the data that Illustrator is using to keep track of the shapes and colors and images. All of that stuff is still in here, and we can actually move that stuff around. Like I can see like there's this kind of interesting path down here. Maybe I want to move that up to the front, or maybe I want to have this in front. Like I can move these around just by dragging these guys here. This little circle here will also select specific things for me. So if I have the selection tool, the little arrow here, and I click on one of these circles, let's say I want to move this around, but I'm not sure where it is, and let's say I want to move this down here, I can click on that circle to get that specific little path or layer or whatever happens to be there. And then if I click away from it, or if I click over here, then that selection will go away. So what I want to do now is create a new layer for my type, and then I'm going to label these layers so I know what they are. So I'm going to go down here, and just like in Photoshop, there's these buttons at the bottom of the layer panel. So they're kind of small, they're kind of hard to see, but there's this little plus here that says create new layer. And if I do that, it'll say layer 2. And one of the things you'll notice, I'm going to drag my type up here. So now I can turn the type on and off versus the background graphic. And one thing that you'll notice is that my layers have different colors associated with them. So when I select this layer, the highlight or the selection is like blue, whereas when I select this layer, this selection is red. So that helps me see the difference between the different layers. And then I can actually change this. Maybe I don't want this to be red because my type is red. So I can change this by double clicking on this dot, although it's not letting me. So let's try control click. Okay, it's not letting me change that. I thought I could change this. Let's see if maybe I need to go up here. Let's select the layer, go up here, options. Okay. So I can change it. It's a little bit more complicated than I thought it was, but I can just change this to like yellow or maybe blue or light blue, something that is not the exact same color as my graphics on here. And that way, now it's a little bit easier to see when I've selected something on one layer or another. Another thing that I can do is if I'm happy with my layer and I don't want to be able to select these by accident, I can just lock this. And now I can only select my text. So if I try to edit the background or if I click on it by mistake, nothing will happen. So I'm going to rename this background graphic. And then I'm going to name this my text. And so now I can grab the text and make changes to that by just locking this and just focusing on the text. So I might want to do a couple things here. My text is kind of hard to read because the color, even though red is very different from the background color, they're both very like dense, saturated colors, so they're kind of hard to differentiate on the screen. So I could add an outline, but I could also add some like cool effects. And so I'm going to demonstrate an effect just as an example. Again, there's lots of cool effects, but I'm just going to demonstrate one simple effect really quickly just to show the types of things that you can do in Illustrator. Okay, so I'm actually going to turn both of these off for a second and kind of do a little demo where I'm going to make like a little moon graphic, and I'm going to show a couple. one thing that we actually used last time, but then a couple other things that are new. So if I want to make a moon graphic, I'm going to click on my shape tool, and I'm going to hold down so I get this menu, and I'm going to choose the ellipse tool. And I'm going to hold shift to get a consistent circle instead of an ellipse. So I'm holding shift on the keyboard, and I'm going to make just a little circle here. I'm going to change the fill to blue. And then I'm going to grab my select tool and move this over. So just to quickly review, remember the difference between, there's two arrow tools. One is selection and the other is direct selection. So select is for grabbing like a whole object. And then I can also do transformations. I can scale. I can, if I hover in the right area, I can rotate, although rotating a circle doesn't really do a whole lot. And I can, with a circle, I can make this adjustment where I kind of open the mouth of the circle. And I can move it around. I can scale up and down like that. So that's the selection tool. The direct selection tool, the second arrow that's filled in, is for grabbing specific points. So if I grab a specific point on my circle, I'm changing like this actual little point. And so if I want to make like, I don't know, like a raindrop or something like that, I don't want it to be fully circular, so I can like drag this up like here. And there's also these little handles that determine the curve. These are called the Bezier handles. You'll probably learn this in more depth at some point in another class, but for now, you can see that if I just grab these and kind of drag them around, I basically get these different qualities of curve. And if I drag them all the way in, then the curve kind of goes away. So it just becomes like a straight angle. So that's just a quick review of the difference between the selection tool and the direct selection tool. And it can be a little tricky to get used to using those at first, but it's a thing that you just kind of have to, work on it and, get used to it. So now I'm going to make my moon a little bit more interesting. I have this like circle here, and I'm going to open up this layer so you guys can see how this is changing as I edit it. And now, if I want to duplicate this object without having to recreate it, I can hold Option Alt on the keyboard. And if I select my shape and then hold Option Alt, notice that my cursor turns into like two little arrows. This is the cloning or duplicating cursor, and I can just create as many of these new circles as I want. I'm just going to create one. I'm going to place it right here, and then I'm going to select these two. And so now I have like the intersection of these two circles. And this is a good way, I'm going to move this up actually. This is a good way to create new shapes from more complicated geometries. So we talked about this a little bit, but remember I have this thing called the shape builder. And if I grab this, I can basically choose one or multiple of these intersections to create a new shape. So I'm going to click on this intersection here. And look how it changed here. Now I have a circle, I have the inside, and then I have this path on the side. So it created some new shapes. I'm going to remove this circle, so I'm just going to select it and hit delete on the keyboard. Then I'm going to grab the inside, do the same thing, and now I just have this like little moon. So now I want to do something cool with the moon. So I'm going to duplicate it again. I'm going to hold Option and drag this moon down here. And now I'm going to use another one of my sort of interesting effect tools, which is the blend tool. So this is really useful to use if you want to create a gradient or blend shapes together. It's a little tricky to use, and I'll show you why. When I click on the blend tool, basically it's going to take whatever shape I have selected, and then you can see when it has the star, that means it's going to add this other shape. And so I have to like click on here. Okay, see, you can see what I'm talking about. It's kind of hard to use. I'm going to try that again. So the order that we grab these shapes in kind of really changes what happens. Okay, so now I've got the shapes in the right order. It doesn't, you can kind of play around with this, but basically we just need to select our two shapes. But then this doesn't really look that interesting. Actually, let me do one, I forgot one step. I'm just going to really quickly go back for a second. I want to also blend the color, not just the shape. So I'm going to select my second moon, and I'm going to change the fill to pink, just so we can see this change in color. Okay, so then I'm going to go back to my blend tool. I'm going to select my first one and my second one. There, now we see the kind of gradient blend that happens. And the thing that's really nice about this is the shapes themselves have not been changed. So notice I have a new layer here called blend. And I can open this up and I can see here's the actual path of my blend, which I can select and edit. I can move this around. Here's the original, one of the original shapes. I can edit this and I could scale it. I can do all sorts of different stuff with this. So I can edit the original shape, and I can also edit this other shape. So I can move this guy around. I can move it in like that. Maybe I prefer this direction. Maybe I can scale it down a little bit. I'm holding shift to keep the same size. So I can create kind of an interesting graphic. I can kind of edit this path and do different things. Maybe I want to drag it out a little bit, so I can select this path and then take the direct selection tool and grab this one point and like bring it out there a little bit. That doesn't look that good, but just as an example, I can do a lot of different things with that. There's also, if I click on blend, there's this tab called blend options. So this is in the properties thing, so it's kind of hard to find sometimes. But if I click on blend options, this brings up some different options. I can do specified steps. So it made 254 steps between these two shapes, but it might look interesting if I just have like 10 steps between the two shapes. Now, if I select my blend path and I like move this around, that's a slightly different effect. We don't get the smooth gradient. Now we see these steps in between. So that's kind of nice. That's kind of cool. Let's select our blend again. And what if we did like 50 steps? So now we can see it mostly looks like a smooth gradient, but there's like a little jagged edge. So you can get some kind of cool effects that way. Okay, so what if I wanted to apply this effect to my text? This is going to be a little bit more tricky, but let's bring back in some of my other stuff. Maybe I'll take this moon graphic and scale it down a little bit and put it up here inside the rest of my design. And I'm going to move the text up here for a second and then lock this and unlock my text. So my text is a bunch of different paths. I already turned this into a group because I wanted to move the circle down. Okay, so actually that's fine. I already did the first step of this. What I had before was just like type, which I think in the first video I must have converted that into shapes because it looks like I've already done that. So that's good. So let's see if we can use this same effect with our text to make it stand out a little bit more against the background. I can review that real quick since we already did that, but we probably did it kind of quickly. Let's put another text layer in here. I'm just going to get my type tool, and I'm going to write MMP 100, and then I'm going to select this whole thing, and I'm going to go over to properties and make some changes. So I'm going to change the font to something that looks good for this class. So I'm just going to scroll through the fonts. They have a nice little preview of all these different fonts. You'll learn about font a lot more in like typography or some other classes that you could take. We'll talk about it a little bit more later in the semester, but for now, I'm just going to go with this one. That looks kind of cool. I'm going to make it bigger. So for some reason, 72 is like the highest here, but we can actually go above that. I'm going to try like 120. That's a little too big, so what I can do is make my font box a little bigger. Okay, that looks pretty good. And let's get the type tool again and select our type. I'm going to, I want the words to be a little bit closer together. So that's not what I want to do. Let's see, maybe if I center the paragraph, that'll look better. And maybe if I say, oh, it won't let me change that for some reason. Okay, that's fine. Let's change the color. So let's do like pink. That could be cool. And so now we've got our type. So what I was going to talk about is that I can't blend type to type. it won't let me do that. So even if I take my layer 4 and I hold Command Option, I can duplicate the type like that. And then I can take my blend tool, but it's not going to let me blend type to type. So I'm going to deselect for a second. I'm going to take my blend tool, and see, it won't let me select the type. So if I want to use the type for my blend, what I need to do, I'm just going to duplicate this real quick so I can edit my type later if I want to. What I need to do is convert this type into outlines or shapes. So I can select the type, I can go to Object, and I can go to Expand, and that'll just let me turn this into an object. That's one way to do it. I can also just right-click or context-click on the type, and I can go to, where is it? Oh, it says redo expand because I just did it. Okay, so then we have this group, which is paths like our shapes. Okay, so now I have this group, and again, I can hold Option to duplicate this, and then I can, let's change the color. Maybe I'll change it to white so it'll stand out a lot. And then I'm going to deselect. I'm going to grab my blend tool, take my first type and my second type. And so notice that it's only added a couple in between. So I need to click on my blend options down here. And I'm going to go to specified steps. And I'm going to say like 100. And so now I get this nice gradient effect. It looks a little goofy. So let's see if we can go into our blend and get our path. And I'm going to use the direct select tool so I can just select one point of this path and try moving it like this. Let's try, oh, it won't let me go like straight down. Okay, that looks okay. I'm going to go back to my blend. I'm going to do less steps. I'm going to do like maybe, let's try 25 steps. Okay, that looks kind of fun. Okay, so I can keep playing around with that. Another effect that I might want to get, since I have my blend here, what I can actually do, I'm going to take this group. This is the white text at the end. And I'm going to take this and copy it and put it up here. So I did the same thing I would do if I was copying from here. I just grab the group in the layers, and I hold Option Alt on the keyboard, and I just drag this up to make a copy. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn off the fill and add a little black stroke. So this is going to make it a lot clearer to read. So I get like a combination of the effect, and I get a little bit more clear text that I can see there. Okay, so again, these are just some different effects. Another thing that I could do that might be fun with my type, let's maybe turn this off for a second and turn this one back on. I'm going to duplicate this one again. So I could take some type and I could add other effects to it. So I'm going to expand this again. Okay, I guess I have to go to Object, Expand. And if I go into Effect, there's a bunch of other cool stuff I can do in here. Like I can warp stuff. I can do 3D effects. Like I could do a inflate, and that'll kind of like add like some 3D like shading in here. Let's zoom in a little bit. So you can see it added this kind of like 3D effect. I can increase like the depth here. I could twist this. I don't know why I'd want to do that, but it could be kind of cool. That's a little bit too much. Let's not twist it that much. It's running a little slow on my computer, maybe because I'm recording. You can do a little twist. There's a taper component to it. There's a volume component to it. So there's different effects we can play with here. With these different effects, I would recommend just like looking at them and saying if something looks like it could be interesting, just like playing around with it. 3D obviously is going to get more complicated. They have some like cool materials I could add in here. So there's a lot of different stuff you could do in there. Okay. There's also like basic 2D effects, like I could do like a wave effect. And so if I do like a lot of vertical wave, it kind of looks like it's kind of like a wave going backwards. I could undo that. So there's a whole bunch of different effects in here that could be fun to play around with. Let's try, oh, a flag might be kind of fun. That's a little bit too much. That's kind of cool. Okay, so anyway, we can play with some different effects. Again, there's a whole lot of different stuff in there that I recommend just trying out if you want to get like an interesting look. But you can also kind of create your own stuff with the blend tool. There's also the shape builder that we used a little bit. There is, if we go in here, there's a whole bunch of other like special tools that do different kind of crazy stuff that isn't in the main toolbox. This one is really cool, the mesh tool. Oh, I guess that's under here. Let's take a look at that for a second, and then I think I'll end soon after. So let's make a new layer. I'm going to turn these off for a second. And let's say we have, or actually let's duplicate our background graphic and play with that for a second. Okay. So I'm just going to select this whole thing and go to Object and where's the group? Okay, I'm just going to hit Command G to group. And let's simplify this and say okay. And then I can add my mesh tool and select this thing. Uh-oh. Oh, it's not, I didn't group it right. Okay. Okay, what I want to do is, maybe I want to join. Object, join. Oh, I have too much stuff in here to join. Okay. All right, let's get rid of most of this stuff and just choose one of them. Okay, I'll use this guy. And so if we add the mesh tool to this one, it's going to make it so that we can kind of like warp this object. Although it looks like it's not letting me apply it the way I want to. Okay. It's basically like it's doing something weird. I think because my geometry is too complicated. Let's try a different one. Okay. So when I make the mesh tool, it basically makes these new points. It's not letting me edit them. Where I can kind of like move these around. And make these like new shapes. But I think I have to add more. There we go. So I can add these like extra lines to the geometry, and then I can kind of like manipulate, like I can like take this group and kind of like move them around or rotate them, and it kind of treats it like a cloth or like a more like physical object. It's a little annoying. I remember it being a lot easier to manipulate the points and like create more interesting stuff. Okay, maybe I need to get the mesh. It won't let me click on these things. Here we go. Yeah, okay, so I can like manipulate these points and kind of like play around with the mesh. I remember it being a little bit easier to like select a group of points and like rotate them and stuff. but it's giving me kind of a hard time with that. Anyway, that's just another example. There's a lot of different effects we can do. That one maybe is a little too complicated to use. But ultimately, we just want to make something that, has kind of an interesting look to it and uses the different Illustrator properties that we might not have in Photoshop or, a different context. Okay, I'm going to stop here and I'll give you guys time to work on stuff in class.